The stars look different from here. Commander Veltar presses long, blue fingers against the viewport of his diplomatic vessel, and watched the small yellow sun grow larger. Earth, the third planet from this unremarkable star, held a species that had just discovered faster than light travel. Another routine first contact mission. Veltar had done this 43 times before. Young species always followed the same pattern. First came fear, then wonder, then desperate attempts to prove themselves worthy of joining the galactic community. The Zephyrians had guided dozens of species through this process over the past 3 centuries. It was what they did best. Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the human orbital station, his communications officer announced. The translation matrix hummed as it processed the alien language. This is Ambassador Kate Morrison of the United Earth Government. Welcome to our system, Commander Veltar. We're honored by your visit. Veltar smiled. Perfect manners already. The humans had clearly studied the diplomatic protocols they'd been sent. Thank you, Ambassador Morrison. I look forward to our meeting. The human station was impressive for such a young species. Clean lines, efficient design, and surprisingly advanced defensive systems. Not that they would be needed. The Galactic Council protection extended to all member species, and even probationary members were safe from outside threats. Veltar's shuttle docked smoothly. As he stepped through the airlock, he got his first close look at humans. They were shorter than Zephyrians, with strange patches of hair on their heads and faces. Their skin came in different shades of brown and pink, but their eyes were what caught his attention. Bright, alert, constantly moving. Ambassador Morrison was a woman with short gray hair and laugh lines around her eyes. Beside her stood Admiral Ben Collins, a tall man with dark skin and a firm handshake. They both smiled widely, showing their white teeth. Commander Veltar, welcome aboard Station Unity, Morrison said. We prepared quarters for you and your staff. I hope you'll find them comfortable. The quarters were more than comfortable. The humans had studied Zephyrian biology and adjusted the air mixture, temperature, and even the lighting to match his home world. Such attention to detail was rare among new species. Over dinner, Veltar learned more about humanity. They were curious about everything. Morrison asked dozens of questions about other species, trade routes, and galactic politics. Collins wanted to know about military protocols and defense strategies. Their enthusiasm was refreshing. How many species belong to the Galactic Council? Morrison asked, taking notes on a small device. Currently, we have 47 full members and 12 probationary members. Veltar replied. The Council has maintained peace for over 800 years. Impressive, Collins said. How do you handle disputes between species? Through discussion and compromise. Violence is almost unknown among civilized species. When differences arise, we talk until we find a solution that works for everyone. The humans exchange glances. Something flickered across their faces too quickly for Veltar to interpret. That must require great patience, Morrison said carefully. Indeed, but patience is the foundation of civilization. The next few days passed pleasantly. Veltar toured human facilities, met with their scientists and leaders, and began the formal process of evaluating their readiness for council membership. Humans were adaptable, intelligent, and eager to learn. Their technology was advancing rapidly, and their social structures seemed stable. But there were oddities. Human entertainment included something called action movies that depicted graphic violence in great detail. Their history books were filled with wars, conflicts, and struggles. When Veltar asked about this, the humans seemed uncomfortable. We've had our share of problems, Morrison admitted, but we're working to move beyond that. Joining the galactic community represents a new chapter for humanity. Veltar nodded approvingly. Many species went through violent phases before achieving true civilization. The fact that humans recognized their past mistakes was encouraging. On his 4th day aboard the station, Veltar attended a briefing about human military capabilities. It was standard procedure for new species to demonstrate their defensive readiness. Admiral Collins presented their fleet composition, weapon systems, and tactical doctrines. The presentation was thorough, perhaps too thorough. Collins spoke with casual precision about destructive capabilities, casualty projections, and something called acceptable losses. The terms were familiar from other species' militaries, but the way Collins used them felt different somehow. Our primary doctrine focuses on rapid deployment and overwhelming force concentration, Collins explained, showing tactical diagrams. We found that decisive action minimizes overall casualties. Dr. Lisa Park, the human's chief xenobiologist, attended the briefing. She was a quiet woman with sharp green eyes who rarely spoke unless asked direct questions. When she did speak, her words were carefully chosen and precisely delivered. Dr. Park. Veltar said, "What role does xenobiology play in your military planning?" "Understanding alien physiology helps us develop better medical treatments for our allies," she replied smoothly, "and better protective equipment for our own forces." Something in her tone made Veltar pause, but he couldn't identify what bothered him. The formal evaluation took 2 weeks. Humanity passed every test easily. Their technology was adequate, their society stable, and their leaders rational. Veltar prepared his recommendation for probationary membership, confident that humans would make fine additions to the galactic community. On his last night aboard the station, Morrison hosted a farewell dinner. The humans were genuinely grateful for his guidance and support. They spoke of their hopes for the future, their desire to contribute to galactic peace, and their commitment to learning from older, wiser species. "We know we have much to learn," Morrison said, raising a glass of human wine, "but we're ready to take our place among the stars." Veltar raised his own glass to humanity's bright future in the Galactic Council. As he prepared for departure the next morning, Veltar felt satisfied with his work. Another successful first contact, another species welcomed into civilization. The humans were unusual in some ways, but all species had their quirks. Their emotional expressiveness and historical violence were just growing pains they would outgrow. His ship undocked from Station Unity and began its journey back to Council space. Veltar settled into his quarters and began writing his report. "Humanity shows great promise," he typed. "Recommend immediate probationary membership with full evaluation in 1 standard year." He had no way of knowing that in 3 months, his recommendation would thrust humanity into a conflict that would change his understanding of fear forever. For now, he was simply a diplomat who had completed another routine mission among the stars. The yellow sun grew small behind them as they jumped to hyperspace, carrying news of humanity's first step into the larger galaxy. The Galactic Council chambers buzzed with nervous energy. Veltar had never seen the great hall so full of tension. Representatives from 47 species sat in their assigned seats, but today the usual calm discussions were replaced by worried whispers and fearful glances. 3 months had passed since Veltar's recommendation for humanity's probationary membership had been approved. The humans had established a small embassy on the council station and were slowly learning galactic protocols. Everything had been proceeding normally until yesterday's emergency session. High Counselor Zarth of the ancient ethereal race called for order. Her voice carried across the massive chamber without amplification. A traitor species had evolved over millions of years. "Fellow counselors, we face a threat not seen for 3,000 years. The void swarm has returned." A chill ran through the chamber. Even the youngest species had heard the old stories. The void swarm was a nightmare from the galaxy's dark past, a parasitic race that consumed entire worlds and left nothing behind but empty husks of planets. 17 Outer Rim colonies have gone silent in the past month. Zarth continued. Long-range scouts confirmed the worst. The swarm is not extinct as we believed. They have returned, and they are hungry. Veltar watched the human representative, Ambassador Morrison, as the briefing continued. Unlike the other delegates who showed clear signs of fear, she sat perfectly still, listening intently to every word. Her aide, Dr. Lisa Park, took notes on a small tablet, her fingers moving steadily across the screen. The briefing grew worse with each new detail. Entire star systems stripped of all organic matter. Billions of lives consumed to feed the swarm's endless hunger. Defense fleets overwhelmed by sheer numbers and alien tactics that defied conventional military thinking. The Kalari Confederation has requested immediate evacuation assistance, announced General Fexvar, the Council's military coordinator. Their outer colonies cannot be defended with our current fleet positioning. What about a counterattack? Asked Ambassador Roth of the Crystalline Hegemony. Surely we cannot simply run from this threat. General Thexvar's for arms gestured helplessly. The swarm's tactics are unlike anything in our military databases. They seem to learn and adapt faster than our forces can respond. Every engagement has resulted in significant casualties with minimal impact on their advance. Veltar noticed Dr. Park lean forward slightly when the general mentioned adaptation and learning. Her green eyes fixed on the tactical displays with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. The debate continued for hours. Some delegates argued for immediate evacuation of all Outer Rim territories. Others insisted on a defensive strategy, using established fortress worlds to slow the swarm's advance. A few suggested attempting diplomatic contact, though the briefing materials made clear that the swarm showed no interest in communication. Ambassador Morrison remained silent throughout most of the discussion. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and measured. Honored counselors, humanity is new to this body, and we understand our place as junior members. However, we would like to offer our assistance in this crisis. A murmur ran through the chamber. Several delegates exchanged glances. What could such a young species possibly offer against a threat that had terrified the galaxy for millennia? We appreciate the gesture, Ambassador Morrison. High Counselor Zardich replied diplomatically, but perhaps it would be best for humanity to focus on defending your own systems during this difficult time. With respect, High Counselor, we believe we may have something to contribute. Dr. Park has been studying the available data on the Void Swarm, and she has some interesting observations. Dr. Park stood smoothly and activated a holographic display. Her presentation was precise and professional, but something about her manner made Veltar's skin crawl. She spoke about the swarm's biology and tactics with the same tone other beings might use to discuss the weather. The swarm's primary advantage lies in their reproductive rate and collective intelligence, she explained, highlighting various data points. However, this also creates potential vulnerabilities. Their rapid adaptation suggests a centralized processing system that could theoretically be disrupted. Theoretically, General Thexvar said, but getting close enough to their command structures would require tactics that civilized species cannot contemplate. Dr. Park's expression didn't change, but Veltar caught a brief flicker in her eyes. Of course, General. We're simply offering to share our analysis and any resources that might prove useful. High Counselor Zarth nodded graciously. Your offer is appreciated and will be taken under consideration. But Ambassador Morrison wasn't finished. High Counselor, if I may, we would also like to volunteer our military forces for the defense effort. Admiral Collins has expressed his willingness to place our entire fleet under Council command. This drew surprised looks from many delegates. Veltar himself was shocked. Humanity had only a few dozen ships, hardly enough to make a significant difference against the swarm's vast numbers. Ambassador Morrison, High Counselor Zardi said gently, your willingness to help is commendable, but perhaps humanity's ships will be better used defending Earth and your other colonies. Morrison's response sent a chill through Veltar that he couldn't explain. High Counselor, with all due respect, if the Void Swarm isn't stopped at the Outer Rim, there won't be anywhere safe to run to. We'd rather fight them out there than wait for them to come to us. The simple logic was undeniable, but the way she said it bothered Veltar. There was no fear in her voice, no uncertainty. Just a cold calculation that spoke of unpleasant necessities. After the session ended, Veltar found himself walking beside Dr. Park as they left the chamber. Doctor, your analysis of the swarm was quite thorough. How long did it take you to prepare? I've been studying the available data since the first reports came in, she replied. The swarm's biology is fascinating from a research perspective. They've achieved a level of adaptive efficiency that most species can only dream of. Something in her tone made Veltar stop walking. You almost sound like you admire them. Dr. Park turned to face him, and for a moment her professional mask slipped. I admire efficiency, Commander, and effectiveness. The swarm has survived for millions of years by being very good at what they do. Understanding your enemy is the first step to defeating them. As she walked away, Veltar realized that Dr. Park hadn't just been studying the swarm's biology. She'd been studying their methods, their tactics, their approach to warfare. And she'd been doing it with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining bacteria under a microscope. 2 days later, the Council formally accepted humanity's offer of military assistance. Admiral Collins would serve as a liaison officer with the combined fleet, and human ships would be integrated into the Defense Force. As a senior diplomat who would sponsor humanity's membership, Veltar was assigned to accompany the human contingent as an observer and advisor. As he prepared to board the human command ship USS Defiance, Veltar told himself he was doing his duty. Humanity was young and inexperienced, and they would need guidance during their first major galactic conflict. But deep down, a small voice whispered that he was making a terrible mistake. The voice grew louder as he watched human crew members loading supplies onto their ships. They moved with quiet efficiency, their faces serious but not afraid. These weren't the actions of a species facing an impossible enemy. These were the actions of predators preparing for a hunt. Veltar pushed the thought away. Humans were civilized now. They'd left their violent past behind. Whatever was bothering him was just his imagination running wild under the stress of the crisis. As the USS Defiance prepared to depart for the front lines, Veltar settled into his guest quarters and tried to focus on his mission. He was here to guide and advise, to help humanity take its first steps as a true member of the galactic community. He had no way of knowing that in the coming weeks, humanity would teach him things about warfare that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. The USS Defiance hummed through hyperspace toward the war zone, and Veltar found himself studying the humans with growing unease. He'd expected nervous energy, fear, or at least the kind of excited chatter that young species usually display before their first major conflict. Instead, the ship operated with a quiet efficiency that reminded him of a well-oiled machine. Captain Ryan Stone was a man of medium height, with graying hair and calm brown eyes. He moved through his ship like he owned every bolt and wire, and his crew responded to him with instant obedience. During the daily briefings, Stone discussed battle plans with a matter-of-fact tone that made Veltar's skin crawl. Casualties for first engagement are estimated between 15 and 30%, Stone told his senior staff. Medical teams are prepared for triage protocols. Engineering has spare parts ready for rapid repairs. All departments report ready for combat operations. Veltar shifted uncomfortably in his observer's chair. Among civilized species, casualty projections of even 5% would cause serious discussion about alternative strategies. The humans accepted 30% losses as simply part of the plan. Captain, Veltar said during a break in the briefing, perhaps we should discuss ways to minimize casualties. The other council species would be more comfortable with a more defensive approach. Stone looked at him with those calm brown eyes. Commander, I appreciate your concern, but in war, people die. The question isn't whether we'll take casualties, but whether those casualties will serve a purpose. I'd rather lose 30% of my people stopping the swarm here than lose everyone when they reach inhabited systems. The logic was sound, but the casual way Stone discussed losing nearly a third of his crew chilled Veltar to the bone. This wasn't the attitude of civilized being forced into conflict. This was the mindset of someone who understood war on a level that most species never reached. Dr. Park spent most of her time in the ship's science lab, analyzing data on void swarm biology and tactics. Veltar visited her laboratory on the third day of their journey, hoping to better understand the human approach to xenobiology. The lab was clean and organized, filled with advanced equipment that impressed even Veltar's experienced eye. Dr. Park worked at a central console, surrounded by holographic displays, showing swarm anatomy and behavioral patterns. The swarm's reproductive cycle is remarkable, she said without looking up as Veltar entered. They can adapt their offspring to specific environmental challenges within a single generation. Most species take thousands of years to achieve similar evolutionary changes. You've learned a great deal from such limited data, Veltar observed. You have to understand your enemy if you want to beat them, she replied, finally turning to face him. The swarm has survived for millions of years by being perfectly adapted for one thing: consumption. They're not evil or malicious. They're just very, very good at what evolution designed them to do. And what have you concluded from your studies? Dr. Park smiled, and something about that expression made Veltar take a step backward. I've concluded that the swarm has never encountered a species like humanity. They face civilized races who fight defensively, try and preserve life, and minimize damage. They've never faced anyone willing to match their level of ruthlessness. Before Veltar could ask what she meant, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Captain Stone's voice came over the intercom. All hands to battle stations. We're dropping out of hyperspace in 30 seconds. Prepare for immediate combat operations. Veltar hurried to the bridge, his heart's pounding with anxiety. Through the main viewport, he could see the New Haven system spread out before them. 3 planets, 2 moons, and several asteroid mining stations made up the home of the Kalari Confederation's largest colony. One of the moons was gone. Not destroyed, simply gone, leaving only a sphere of empty space where it had once orbited. Swarm feeding pattern confirmed, reported Lieutenant Amy Carter from the tactical station. They've completely consumed Lunar Colony 7. Estimated biomass consumed, 12 million Kalari civilians. Captain Stone studied the tactical display with the same expression he might use to check the weather. Swarm fleet composition? 47 major bioships, over 300 smaller vessels. They're currently stripping organic matter from the second moon while maintaining a defensive perimeter around the main planet. Veltar watched in horror as the display showed the reality of swarm feeding. Living ships, grown rather than built, were systematically devouring everything organic on the moon's surface. The process was efficient, thorough, and absolutely terrifying. Orders from the fleet commander? Stone asked. Standard defensive formation. Protect evacuation ships, and minimize engagement with swarm forces. Stone nodded calmly. Understood. Navigation. Plot a course to the fleet rendezvous point. Engineering. Prepare for emergency power distribution. All weapon stations. Load mixed ordnance, and prepare for close engagement. Close engagement, sir? Lieutenant Carter looked surprised. Standard doctrine called for long-range harassment to cover the evacuation. Standard doctrine wasn't written for fighting the swarm. Stone replied. Long-range harassment won't stop them from finishing their feeding. If we want to save the Kalari on the main planet, we need to hurt them enough to make them withdraw. Veltar found his voice. Captain, surely the priority should be evacuating as many civilians as possible. The combined fleet can cover the evacuation while the swarm finishes consuming 2 billion Kalari. Stone interrupted. Commander, I respect your position as our advisor, but you need to understand something. The swarm doesn't take prisoners, doesn't negotiate, and doesn't stop feeding until everything organic is gone. Our choice isn't between fighting and evacuating. Our choice is between fighting now or fighting later with fewer ships and more dead civilians. The USS Defiance broke formation from the main fleet and accelerated toward the swarm perimeter. Other human ships followed. 13 vessels against hundreds of enemy bioships. Veltar gripped his chair as the tactical display showed their desperate odds. All ships, this is Captain Stone. Remember your training and trust your equipment. We're going to hit them hard and fast. Then get out before they can organize a response. Make every shot count. The first engagement lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Veltar watched in stunned silence as human ships dove through the swarm formation like knives through flesh. They fired at point-blank range, targeting specific weak points that Dr. Park's analysis had identified. 3 swarm bioships exploded in brilliant fireballs. 2 more were severely damaged and began falling toward the planet's surface. The rest of the swarm fleet reacted with surprising speed, turning to engage the human attackers. All ships, emergency withdrawal, Stone ordered. Rendezvous at coordinates 77 Alpha. The human ships scattered like startled fish, using their superior speed and maneuverability to escape the swarm's counterattack. 2 human vessels took damage, but all 13 ships made it back to the fleet perimeter. As medical teams treated wounded crew members and engineers repaired battle damage, Veltar tried to process what he'd witnessed. The humans had deliberately flown into a formation that should have meant certain death. They'd ignored every principle of civilized warfare, fighting like savages instead of soldiers. And it had worked. For the first time in recorded history, a void swarm-feeding operation had been interrupted. The bio ships had pulled back from the second moon to form a tighter defensive perimeter, giving the evacuation fleet precious hours to save Kalari civilians. That night, as the combined fleet regrouped and prepared for the next day's operations, Veltar lay in his quarters staring at the ceiling. He'd always believed that civilization meant rising above the brutal necessities of survival. He'd thought that wisdom came from finding peaceful solutions to conflict. But the humans had just taught him something that challenged everything he believed about warfare and civilization. Sometimes, the most civilized thing you could do was embrace savagery in service of a greater good. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Veltar wondered what other lessons humanity would teach him before this war was over. He was beginning to suspect that he wouldn't like the answers. The battle for New Haven began at dawn on the fourth day. Veltar stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, watching as the combined galactic fleet moved into position around Kalari homeworld. 2 billion innocent civilians waited on the planet below, while the void swarm tightened its grip around the system. Fleet composition report, Captain Stone requested. Lieutenant Carter read from her tactical display. 87 Council ships in standard defensive formation. 13 human vessels in forward assault positions. The swarm forces have increased to 62 major bio ships and approximately 400 smaller attack craft. Veltar studied the odds and felt his hope drain away. Even with the human ships, they were outnumbered nearly 4-1. The swarm had spent the past 3 days consuming the system's outer colonies, growing stronger while the Council fleet waited for reinforcements that never came. Orders from Fleet Commanders X-High? Stone asked. Standard defensive screen. Protect evacuation transports and avoid direct engagement with swarm forces unless absolutely necessary. Stone nodded without emotion. Veltar had learned to read the captain's expressions over the past few days, and that calm acceptance meant Stone was about to do something that would horrify the other species in the fleet. Navigation. Plot intercept courses for the primary swarm-feeding clusters. Engineering. Prepare for ramming speed on my command. All weapon stations. Prepare for point-blank engagement. Sir, Lieutenant Carter said carefully, those orders seem to contradict the fleet commander's instructions. The fleet commander is thinking like a civilized being, Stone replied. The swarm isn't civilized. If we fight them like gentlemen, we'll lose like gentlemen. And 2 billion Kalari will die while we maintain proper formation. Stone activated the ship-wide communication system. All hands, this is a captain. We're about to engage the swarm at close range. Our mission is simple. Hurt them so badly they abandon the system. Some of us won't be coming home, but if we do our job right, 2 billion innocent people will live to see tomorrow. That's a trade I'm willing to make. Stone out. Veltar felt his heart racing as the human ships broke formation and accelerated toward the swarm fleet. The other Council ships maintained their defensive positions, following orders and protocol, while the humans prepared to sacrifice themselves for strangers. Captain, Veltar said urgently, surely there must be a better way. Perhaps if we coordinate with the other fleet commanders. Commander, with all due respect, your people have been fighting wars for thousands of years, and you've never faced anything like the swarm. My species has been fighting wars since we climbed out of caves, and we've faced enemies just like them. Trust us on this one. The first wave of swarm attack craft met the human formation halfway between the main fleet and the feeding clusters. Veltar watched in horror as tiny human fighters engaged bioships 10 times their size in close combat. The humans flew their ships like weapons, using ramming attacks and suicide runs to destroy enemies they couldn't outgun. 3 human fighters crashed directly into a swarm bioship's feeding port, detonating their reactors inside the creature's digestive system. The explosion tore the bioship apart from the inside, scattering debris across thousands of kilometers. All ships, target the feeding appendages, Captain Stone ordered. Make them choose between fighting us and finishing their meal. The USS Defiance dug toward a cluster of bioships that were strip-mining the planet's largest moon. Stone ordered weapons fire concentrated on the organic cables that connected the ships to the moon's surface, cutting their feeding lines and forcing them to withdraw or starve. A massive swarm mothership, easily 5 times the size of any council vessel, turned to engage the humans directly. Its bioweapons fired streams of acidic plasma that melted through armor plating like water through paper. Ramming speed. Stone ordered calmly. All hands, brace for impact. Captain, no. Veltar shouted. That ship will destroy us. Maybe, Stone agreed, but we'll hurt it first. And sometimes that's enough. The USS Defiance accelerated directly toward the mothership's central mass. At the last second, Stone ordered all weapons to fire directly into the creature's nerve cluster while engineering vented the reactor core into the ship's forward section. The collision was devastating. The USS Defiance disappeared in a ball of plasma and twisted metal, but the explosion tore through the mothership's brain center and left it drifting helplessly in space. Veltar found himself in an escape pod with 12 human crew members, watching their ship's death through a tiny viewport. Around them, the battle continued with the same desperate intensity. Sergeant Amy Carter piloted another escape pod nearby, her left arm hanging useless from swarm acid burns. Captain Stone's sacrifice won't mean anything if we don't finish the job, she said over the radio. All surviving personnel, prepare for boarding actions against damaged swarm vessels. Boarding actions? Veltar couldn't believe what he was hearing. Sergeant, you're talking about hand-to-hand combat with creatures that eat living flesh. That's suicide. Carter's response chilled him to the bone. Commander, humans have been fighting monsters since before we had fire. The swarm might be bigger and hungrier than anything we've faced before, but the principle is the same. You find their weak spots, and you hit them until they stop moving. The surviving humans regrouped their escape pods and assault shuttles, then flew directly into the damaged bioship's interior passages. Veltar went with them, partly from duty and partly because he had to see what happened next. Inside a swarm bioship, the walls were alive. Organic surfaces pulsed with alien heartbeats, while digestive acids dripped from overhead passages. The air was thick with spores and chemical signals that made Veltar's breathing apparatus work overtime. The human Marines moved through the living corridors with practiced efficiency. They carried weapons designed specifically for close-quarters combat, and they used them with terrifying skill. When they encountered swarm warrior forms, they didn't hesitate or show fear. They simply killed everything in their path and kept moving toward the ship's control center. Nerve cluster located, Carter reported, her voice steady despite her wounds. Planning charges now. The humans had brought enough explosives to cripple the bioship's central nervous system. As they retreated through the organic passages, Veltar realized that they'd spent months planning for exactly this kind of mission. They'd studied swarm biology not just to understand their enemy, but to find the best ways to kill them. The charges detonated as their shuttle cleared the bioship's outer skin. Another massive swarm vessel began dying slowly, its biological systems shutting down one by one as neural damage spread through its body. The pattern repeated across the battlefield. Human crews sacrificed their ships to damage swarm vessels, then boarded the wounded bioships to finish them off from the inside. It was brutal, efficient, and absolutely ruthless. By the end of the day, the Void Swarm had lost nearly half their fleet strength. The survivors abandoned New Haven and retreated toward the Galactic Rim, leaving the Kalari homeworld intact but scarred. The cost had been enormous. Of 13 human ships, only 3 remain operational. Casualty reports showed that 60% of human personnel were dead or wounded, but 2 billion Kalari civilians were alive, and for the first time in recorded history, a Void Swarm assault had been completely defeated. As rescue ships collected survivors and medical teams treated the wounded, Veltar tried to understand what he'd witnessed. The humans hadn't just fought bravely or sacrificed themselves heroically. They'd approached the battle with a level of calculated brutality that scared him more than the swarm itself. They'd won by becoming more ruthless than their enemy. And the most terrifying part was that they'd done it while still maintaining their essential humanity. Sergeant Carter had risked her life to save wounded Kalari civilians. Captain Stone had died protecting strangers he'd never met, but they'd also boarded living ships and killed their way through organic corridors without hesitation. They'd used suicide tactics and acceptable losses like tools in a workshop. That night, as Veltar recovered in the medical bay of a Council rescue ship, he realized that humanity had taught the galaxy something new about warfare. They'd shown that civilization didn't mean abandoning brutality. It meant choosing when and how to use it. And that choice, made with cold calculation and unwavering purpose, was more frightening than any alien monster galaxy had ever produced. The medical bay of the Council rescue ship was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft conversations of wounded soldiers. Veltar lay in his recovery bed, his injuries from the battle minor compared to what surrounded him. Human casualties filled nearly half the medical bay, and their behavior disturbed him more than their wounds. A young human marine named Jake Winters occupied the bed next to him. The man's left arm was gone from the elbow down, dissolved by swarm acid during the boarding actions. But instead of showing pain or regret, Winters was joking with the medical staff about getting a cool robot replacement and asking when he could return to duty. The doc says they can fit me with a prosthetic that's better than the original. Winters told Veltar with a grin. Stronger grip, built-in tools, maybe even a weapon system if I ask nicely. You're talking about returning to combat after losing a limb, Veltar said. Try and understand. Don't want to go home? See your family. Winters' expression grew serious for a moment. My family is counting on people like me to stop the swarm before it reaches human space. Besides, Commander, this war isn't going to end with one victory. The swarm has been feeding for millions of years. New Haven was just the beginning. Across the bay, Sergeant Carter was arguing with a Kalari doctor about her treatment schedule. Her acid burns covered 30% of her body, but she insisted on reviewing tactical reports instead of resting. The swarm will adapt to our tactics, she told the doctor. Every day we spend recovering is another day they spend learning how to counter our strategies. I need to be planning the next engagement, not lying in bed. Veltar had seen wounded soldiers from dozens of species over his long career. They usually showed gratitude for rescue, relief and survival, and eagerness to return home. The humans showed something different, a calm acceptance of their injuries and an immediate focus on the larger mission. Dr. Park visited the medical bay on their second day of recovery. She moved between the human patients, asking detailed questions about their experiences during the boarding actions. But she wasn't gathering medical data. She was collecting tactical intelligence. Tell me about the warrior forms you encountered in Sector 7. She asked Private Collins, a young woman with bandages covering chemical burns on her face. They were faster than our briefing suggested, Collins replied, but they had trouble adapting to confined spaces. We used that against them, forcing them into narrow passages where their size became a disadvantage. Dr. Park made notes on her tablet. What about their defensive responses? Did they show coordinated resistance or individual aggression? Coordinated at first, but individual once we disrupted their communication nodes. It's like they became confused without constant direction from the ship's brain. Veltar listened to this conversation with growing unease. Dr. Park wasn't just studying the swarm's biology anymore. She was analyzing their psychology, their tactical responses, their weaknesses. And she was doing it with the clinical detachment of a scientist studying insects. Dr. Park. Veltar said after Collins finished her report, "May I speak with you privately?" They moved to a quiet corner of the medical bay where other patients couldn't overhear. Dr. Park looked at him with those sharp green eyes, waiting for his question. Your research into swarm behavior is very thorough, he began carefully, but I'm concerned about the direction it's taking. Some of your questions seem focused on exploitation rather than understanding. Commander, we're at war with a species that want to consume every living thing in the galaxy. Understanding how to exploit their weaknesses isn't just useful, it's necessary for survival. But there are limits to what civilized beings should do, even in war. The boarding actions were brutal enough. What you're describing sounds like... Like what, Commander? Dr. Park's voice remained perfectly calm, but something in her eyes made Veltar step back. Like biological warfare? Like using their own reproductive systems against them? Like turning their feeding processes into a weapon? Veltar stared at her in horror. You're talking about genocide. I'm talking about survival. The swarm has had millions of years to perfect the R consumption. They've wiped out entire civilizations without mercy or hesitation. If we're going to stop them, we need to be willing to use every advantage we have. There must be other ways. Negotiation, containment, defensive strategies that don't require such extreme measures. Dr. Park smiled, and that expression haunted Veltar's dreams for weeks afterward. Commander, you're thinking like prey. The swarm doesn't negotiate with its food. They don't respect boundaries or honor agreements. They're a force of nature, like a hurricane or an asteroid impact. You don't negotiate with natural disasters. You either survive them or you don't. That evening, Admiral Collins visited the wounded crew members. He moved to the medical bay with quiet dignity, spending time with each patient and listening to their concerns. When he reached Veltar's bed, his expression was somber. Commander, I want to apologize for what you've had to witness. I know our methods are difficult for a council species to understand. Admiral, I'm trying to understand. But what I saw at New Haven, what Dr. Park is planning, it challenges everything I believe about civilized warfare. Collins sat down in the chair beside Veltar's bed. Commander, can I tell you about human history? Not the sanitized version we gave the council, but the real story. Over the next hour, Collins painted a picture of human development that shocked Veltar to his core. Humanity had spent thousands of years in constant warfare, fighting enemies who showed no mercy and expected none in return. They'd faced extinction-level threats before and survived by adapting, learning, and becoming more dangerous than their enemies. We didn't choose to be good at war, Collins explained. We became good at it because the alternative was death. Every human alive today is descended from survivors who were willing to do whatever it took to protect their families and communities. But surely that's in the past. Humanity has evolved beyond such brutality. Collins looked at him with sad, tired eyes. Commander, we've learned to control our violent impulses, but we haven't lost them. When something threatens innocent people, when diplomacy fails and defensive measures aren't enough, we still know how to become the monsters that monsters fear. And that doesn't trouble you? It terrifies me, Collins admitted, but not as much as the alternative. I've seen what happens when good people refuse to fight evil on its own terms. I've seen entire worlds consumed because someone decided that maintaining moral purity was more important than stopping genocide. The next morning, Veltar was cleared for discharge from the medical bay. As he prepared to transfer to a transport ship that would take him back to Council space, he realized he faced a choice. He could return to his comfortable position as a diplomatic observer, filing reports about humanity's unusual military methods. Or he could stay with the human fleet and continue learning about warfare from the galaxy's most effective predators. The choice should have been simple. Veltar was a diplomat, not a soldier. His place was in council chambers, not on battlefields. But as he watched the human crew members prepare for their next mission with quiet professionalism and unwavering determination, he realized that something had changed inside him. The Void Swarm was still out there, adapting and learning from their defeat at New Haven. They would return stronger, smarter, and more dangerous than before. And when they did, the galaxy would need defenders who understood that sometimes the only way to preserve civilization was to temporarily abandon it. Admiral Collins, Veltar said as a transport ship prepared to depart, I would like to remain with the human fleet, as an observer and advisor. Collins studied him carefully. Commander, what we're planning next will make New Haven look like a training exercise. Are you certain you want to see what humanity becomes when we stop holding back? Veltar thought about Jake Winters and his casual acceptance of injury, about Sergeant Carter's determination to continue fighting despite her wounds, about Dr. Park's clinical discussions of biological warfare, about Captain Stone's sacrifice and the 2 billion Kalari civilians who were alive because of it. Admiral, I think I need to understand what you become. For the galaxy's sake and for my own. Collins nodded slowly. Very well, Commander. Welcome to the real war. 2 months after New Haven, the war had reached a turning point. Veltar stood in the briefing room of the newly constructed USS Vengeance, watching as Admiral Collins presented the most desperate plan he'd ever heard proposed by a civilized species. The holographic display showed the galactic core, a region of space so dense with stars and radiation that most species avoided it entirely. Deep within that maze of stellar furnaces and gravitational anomalies, Council intelligence had located the source of their nightmare. Long-range reconnaissance confirms our worst fears. Admiral Collins announced to the assembled fleet commanders. The void swarm's breeding worlds are located here, in the Maelstrom Cluster. 17 planets, each one converted into a massive hatchery, producing billions of swarm entities every cycle. Fleet Commander Zexhai of the Altherian Navy spoke. For every non-human officer in the room, Admiral, even if we could penetrate the cluster's defenses, the radiation alone would kill most of our crews before we reach the target zone. That's assuming a conventional approach, Collins replied. Dr. Park has developed something unconventional. Dr. Park activated a new set of displays, showing biological schematics that made Veltar's skin crawl. We've been studying captured swarm genetic material since New Haven. Their reproductive system has a critical vulnerability that we can exploit. She highlighted a complex molecular structure floating in the hologram. This is the swarm's hive mind link, a biological network that connects every individual to the collective consciousness. It's incredibly efficient, but it's also fragile. A properly designed cascade virus could disrupt the entire network. You're talking about biological warfare on a massive scale, Fleet Commander Zexhai said, his voice filled with horror. That violates every treaty of civilized combat. Collins met his gaze steadily. Commander, the swarm has consumed 43 worlds since New Haven. Trillions of civilians are dead. At their current rate of expansion, they'll reach the core systems within 2 years. We're not talking about warfare anymore. We're talking about survival. Veltar found his voice. Admiral, surely there must be alternatives. Containment strategies, defensive barriers, evacuation protocols, all of which require time we don't have and resources we can't spare, Collins replied. Commander, I respect the Council's commitment to civilized warfare, but civilization is a luxury that prey species can't always afford. Dr. Park continued her presentation, describing how the cascade virus would spread to the swarm's biological network like a cancer, disrupting their collective intelligence and causing their vast fleets to collapse into mindless chaos. The delivery system is a challenge, she explained. We need to introduce the virus directly into the primary hive mind nodes on the breeding worlds. That requires a deep penetration mission into the most heavily defended region of swarm space. Admiral Collins activated another display showing ship configurations and crew assignments. We'll use a single stealth ship modified for extended operations in high-radiation environments. The mission profile called for a volunteer crew, as the chances of return are minimal. You're proposing a suicide mission, Fleet Commander Zexhai said. I'm proposing the end of the war, Collins corrected. 1 ship, 1 crew, 1 chance to stop the swarm before they consume the entire galaxy. The debate that followed revealed the fundamental difference between human and non-human approaches to warfare. The Council representatives argued for defensive strategies, evacuation protocols, and attempts at diplomatic contact. The humans argued for decisive action, acceptable losses, and total victory. The cascade virus is genocide, Veltar said during a break in the discussions. You're talking about exterminating an entire species. Dr. Park looked at him with those sharp green eyes. Commander, the swarm committed genocide against every species they've ever encountered. They don't take prisoners, they don't have civilians, and they don't surrender. They're a biological weapon that someone else created millions of years ago, and now they're out of control. But that doesn't give us the right to what? To defend ourselves? To protect innocent people? Commander, I've studied the swarm for months, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that they will never stop feeding. They can't stop. It's literally what they were designed to do. Collins rejoined the conversation. Commander, I understand your moral concerns, but consider this. If we fail to act now, how many species will the swarm consume while we debate the ethics of stopping them? The question haunted Veltar for the rest of the day. As he reviewed the tactical plans and crew assignments for Operation Prometheus, he realized that the humans had already made their choice. They would carry out the mission with, or without Council approval. That evening, he found himself in the ship's observation lounge. staring out at the stars and trying to reconcile his diplomatic training with the harsh realities of total war. Jake Winters joined him, the young Marine's new prosthetic arm gleaming in the starlight. "Tough choices, huh, Commander?" Winters said, settling into a chair beside him. "I've spent my entire career believing that civilized beings could find peaceful solutions to any conflict. Now I'm watching my closest allies plan genocide, and I'm not certain they're wrong." Winters was quiet for a long moment. "You know what the difference is between humans and most other species, Commander? We've been the prey before. We know what it's like to face extinction and survive only through pure stubborn refusal to die. That's exactly what troubles me. You're fighting like cornered animals." "No, sir," Winters corrected gently. "We're fighting like apex predators who remember being prey. There's a difference. A cornered animal fights desperately and dies quickly. An apex predator fights strategically and wins completely." The next day, Admiral Collins announced the crew selections for Operation Prometheus. Captain Stone's replacement, Commander Lisa Hayes, would lead the mission. Dr. Park would handle the virus deployment. Sergeant Carter would command the Marine detachment, and Veltar would serve as diplomatic observer. "Commander, I can't order you to come on a suicide mission," Collins said privately. "But if this works, if we actually end the swarm threat, someone needs to witness it. Someone needs to tell the galaxy what humanity was willing to do to protect civilization." Veltar considered the offer carefully. Going on the mission meant almost certain death. Staying behind meant living with the knowledge that he'd abandoned his principles when they were needed most. "Admiral, if I accompany this mission, I want your word that everything possible will be done to minimize civilian casualties among the swarm." Collins looked at him strangely. "Commander, the swarm doesn't have civilians. They're a collective organism with specialized functions. Every individual is both a warrior and a worker." "That's not what I mean. I'm talking about the possibility of surrender, of preserving specimens for study, of showing mercy to defeated enemies." Admiral Collins was quiet for a long moment. "Commander, I can promise you that we'll give the swarm exactly the same mercy they've shown to every species they've encountered. No more, no less." It took Veltar a moment to understand the implications of that promise. The swarm had never shown mercy to anyone. They consumed everything organic they encountered, leaving nothing behind but empty worlds and scattered debris. "You're telling me this truly is genocide. I'm telling you this is survival. The swarm made the rules of this conflict when they decided that every living thing in the galaxy was food. We're just playing by their rules now." As the USS Vengeance prepared for its final mission into the galactic core, Veltar realized that he was about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. Not just the end of a war, but the birth of a new kind of species. Humanity was about to cross a line that no other civilization had ever been willing to cross. And the most terrifying part was that they were probably right to do it. The stars of the Maelstrom cluster grew brighter ahead of them as they jumped to hyperspace, carrying a weapon that could end an ancient evil and forever change humanity's place in a galaxy. Veltar wondered if the species that emerged from this conflict would still be the same humans he'd come to know, or something entirely new and far more dangerous. Either way, he was about to find out what happened when civilization's guardians decided to become its executioners. The Maelstrom cluster was a nightmare of twisted space and deadly radiation. Veltar watched through the reinforced viewport of the USS Vengeance as they navigated between stars so close together that their gravitational fields created permanent storms of energy and matter. This was where the Void Swarm had built their ultimate stronghold, in a region of space that would kill most species just by being there. Commander Lisa Hayes stood calmly on the bridge, her hand steady on the tactical displays despite the chaos surrounding their ship. She was younger than Captain Stone had been, but she possessed the same cold competence that Veltar had learned to associate with human military leadership. "Radiation levels are approaching critical," reported Lieutenant Torres from the science station. "Hull plating is holding, but we're already at maximum exposure for most council species." "Acknowledged," Hayes replied. "Dr. Park, status on the virus containers?" Dr. Park looked up from her biological containment unit, a device that held enough engineered death to destroy an entire species. "All samples are stable. The Cascade virus is ready for deployment as soon as we reach the primary hive nodes. Veltar still felt sick every time he looked at that innocent-seeming container. Inside those sealed chambers was humanity's final solution to the swarm problem, a biological weapon designed to spread to the enemy's collective consciousness like wildfire, disrupting their hive mind and causing their entire civilization to collapse. Contact bearing 07 Mark IV, announced Ensign Carter from the sensor station. It's big, Commander. Really big. The main display activated, showing their first glimpse of a swarm-breeding world. Veltar's breath caught in his throat as he realized the scale of what they were seeing. The planet wasn't just infested with swarm creatures. It had been completely converted into a living organism, its surface covered with organic structures that pulse with alien life. Estimated biomass? Commander Hayes asked with professional calm. Approximately 40 billion individual swarm entities, plus the planetary organism itself, Dr. Park replied, her voice filled with scientific fascination. This single world contains more swarm life forms than we've encountered in all our previous battles combined. And there are 17 of these worlds, Veltar said quietly. Exactly, Hayes confirmed, which is why the Cascade virus is our only option. Conventional warfare against this level of concentration would be impossible. They moved deeper into the cluster, passing more breeding worlds and the massive bioships that tended them. Veltar realized that everything they'd fought before had been just the tip of the iceberg. The swarm's true strength lay here, in these twisted systems where entire planets had been converted into hatcheries for an endless war consumption. Primary hive node identified, Dr. Park announced. It's located at the center of the cluster, connected to all 17 breeding worlds through organic communication networks. The central hive was beyond anything Veltar could have imagined, a construct the size of a small moon, grown rather than built, pulsing with the collective thoughts of trillions of swarm entities. Organic cables stretched across space like vast neural pathways, connecting the hive to every breeding world in the system. That's the brain, Dr. Park explained. Destroy that, and the entire swarm network collapses. But we need to deliver the virus directly to the core processing centers, which means getting inside. Commander Hayes said, Sergeant Wilson, prepare your team for insertion. Sergeant Amy Wilson had replaced Carter when she was promoted to another ship. She was a small woman with short red hair and the same deadly competence that Veltar had learned to expect from human Marines. Her team consisted of 8 volunteers, all of whom knew they were going to die in the next few hours. Marines are ready, Commander, Wilson reported. We'll establish a perimeter around the deployment site and hold position until Dr. Park completes the virus release. Veltar found himself assigned to the insertion team, partly as an observer and partly because the humans had decided that someone needed to witness what they were about to do. As they prepared to board the assault shuttle, he tried to process the magnitude of what was happening. Dr. Park, he said as she loaded the virus containers into her deployment system, do you understand what you're about to do? You're ending an entire species that has existed for millions of years. She looked at him with those sharp green eyes. Commander, I'm ending a plague that has consumed countless species over those millions of years. The swarm is a natural life form. Someone created them as a weapon, and now that weapon is out of control. But genocide is genocide, regardless of justification. Is it genocide to cure a disease? To stop a forest fire? To neutralize a chemical weapon? She secured the virus containers with practiced movements. The swarm doesn't have culture, art, philosophy, or individual identity. They're a biological machine programmed to consume and reproduce. We're not destroying a civilization. Commander, we're shutting down a defective weapon. The assault shuttle launched from the USS Vengeance and began its approach to the central hive. Veltar watched through the small viewport as they descended into the organic structure's outer layers, passing through defensive systems that would have destroyed any other species' technology. But the humans had spent months studying swarm biology, learning to mimic their communication signals and biochemical markers. The shuttle's hull had been coated with synthetic organic compounds that fooled the hive's immune system into recognizing them as swarm entities. Insertion point reached, reported the pilot. Prepare for hostile environment operations. They suited up in full environmental gear and prepared to enter a structure that was literally alive. The hive's internal atmosphere was toxic to most carbon-based life forms, and its passages were filled with digestive acids and defensive organisms. The Marines moved through the organic corridors with practiced efficiency, their weapons ready for contact with swarm defenders. But the expected resistance never came. The hive's security systems were designed to repel external attacks, not to deal with enemies that had already penetrated the outer barriers. "It's like walking through someone's bloodstream," Sergeant Wilson observed as they navigated passages that pulsed with alien circulation systems. Dr. Park guided them toward the central processing chamber, following the organic neural networks that carry the hive mind's commands throughout the cluster. The deeper they went, the more obvious it became that they were inside something that was fundamentally alive. "Central processor located," Dr. Park announced as they reached a vast chamber filled with neural tissue and organic computing systems. "Beginning virus deployment now." Veltar watched in fascination and horror as she connected her deployment system to the hive's primary neural network. The cascade virus flowed through the organic cables like poison through veins, beginning its work of disrupting the collective consciousness that controlled trillions of swarm entities. "Deployment complete," Dr. Park reported. "The virus should reach critical propagation within 12 hours. After that, the entire swarm network will begin systematic shutdown. Then our job here is done," Commander Hayes said over the radio. "All teams, return to the shuttle for immediate evacuation." But as they prepared to leave, Veltar realized something was wrong. The hive's neural activity was increasing instead of decreasing. The organic walls around them began pulsing faster, and defensive systems that had ignored them before suddenly activated. "The hive knows what we've done," Dr. Park said with scientific fascination. "It's trying to isolate the infected sections before the virus can spread. Can it succeed?" Veltar asked. "Not for long. But it might delay the cascade long enough to warn the other breeding worlds. Some of them might survive." Commander Hayes made the decision without hesitation. "Dr. Park, can you accelerate the virus propagation?" "Yes, but it would require manual activation of the backup deployment systems. Someone would have to stay behind to complete the process." The silence that followed was brief but meaningful. Every human in the chamber understood what Dr. Park was saying, and they all reached the same conclusion simultaneously. "I'll do it," Commander Hayes said simply. "No, ma'am," Sergeant Wilson interrupted. "This is a job for Marines. My team will handle the final deployment." "Negative, Sergeant. The deployment system requires someone with advanced biochemistry training. Dr. Park and I will complete the mission." Veltar felt something break inside him as he watched these humans calmly discuss who would sacrifice themselves to ensure the mission's success. They weren't heroes driven by emotion or duty. They were professionals completing a necessary task, even though that task required their lives. "Commander, there must be another way," he said desperately. Commander Hayes looked at him with sad, tired eyes. "Commander Veltar, you need to return to the shuttle and make sure the galaxy understands what happened here. Tell them that humanity chose to become monsters so that civilization could survive." As the shuttle carried him away from the dying hive, Veltar watched through the viewport as the cascade virus spread through the swarm's neural networks like wildfire. The organic structure began convulsing as its collective consciousness collapsed, and the same process was spreading to every breeding world in the cluster. Behind them, Commander Hayes and Dr. Park worked to complete humanity's final solution to the swarm problem, knowing they would die in the process, but ensuring that the galaxy's nightmare would end with them. Veltar realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history, the deliberate self-sacrifice of good people who had chosen to damn themselves to save everyone else. And the most terrifying part was understanding that they were absolutely right to do it. The evacuation shuttle broke free of the dying hive just as the cascade virus reached critical propagation. Veltar pressed his face against the viewport and watched as humanity's final weapon spread through the maelstrom cluster like a plague of silence. One by one, the massive bioships went dark. The organic structures covering the breeding world stopped pulsing. The neural networks that had connected trillions of swarm entities for millions of years simply stopped. In the span of 6 hours, The greatest threat the galaxy had ever known died quietly, efficiently, and completely. All swarm activity has ceased, reported the shuttle pilot, a young human named Martinez, whose voice remained steady despite the magnitude of what they'd witnessed. Long-range sensors confirmed total network collapse across all 17 breeding worlds. Veltar felt no celebration, only a hollow emptiness that seemed to match the dead silence of the space around them. Commander Hayes and Dr. Park had stayed behind to ensure the virus reached every node in the network. Their sacrifice had been necessary, calculated, and absolute. Somewhere in the depths of that collapsing hive, two of the bravest people he'd ever known had died to save a galaxy that would never fully understand the price of its salvation. The shuttle docked with the USS Vengeance 12 hours later. Admiral Collins met them at the airlock, his expression grim, despite their success. The bridge crew had monitored the mission through long-range sensors, watching as humanity's greatest military victory became its darkest moral choice. Mission accomplished, Admiral. Martinez reported. The swarm network is completely destroyed. But Commander Hayes and Dr. Park, they didn't make it out. Collins nodded slowly. They knew the risks. They chose to pay the price so others wouldn't have to. Over the following days, as the combined fleet conducted cleanup operations in the cluster, Veltar began to understand the full scope of what humanity had achieved. Every swarm entity in the galaxy had depended on the collective network for basic survival functions. Without that connection, they had simply died where they stood. Worlds that had been under siege for months were suddenly liberated. Evacuation fleets found empty battlefields and silent enemy ships drifting in space. The war was over. Humanity had won total victory through total genocide. The cleanup operations revealed the true horror of what the swarm had been doing. On world after world, the fleet found the remains of consumed civilizations. Empty cities, scattered bones, and memorial statues erected by species that no longer existed. The swarm hadn't just been feeding on the living. They'd been systematically erasing the history and culture of every species they encountered. 43 species completely extinct, reported the archaeological team leader during a briefing. Hundreds more reduced to scattered survivor populations. The swarm wasn't just hunting for food. They were conducting systematic genocide on a galactic scale. Veltar studied the reports in his quarters that night, trying to process the mathematics of extinction. Trillions of sentient beings had died to feed the swarm's endless hunger. Entire civilizations had been reduced to organic matter and processed into new swarm entities. The Cascade virus hadn't just ended a war. It had avenged countless acts of genocide stretching back millions of years. But that didn't make it easier to accept what humanity had done, or what they had become in the process. The return journey to Council Space took 2 weeks. During that time, Veltar interviewed the surviving human crew members, tried to understand how they processed their victory. What he found disturbed him more than their military tactics ever had. Jake Winters, now sporting an advanced prosthetic arm with built-in tools, spoke about the mission with quiet satisfaction. "We did what needed to be done. Commander, the galaxy is safe now. That's worth any price." Even genocide? Winters considered the question carefully. The swarm made the choice to be genocidal. We just applied their own rules back to them. Sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to become something more monstrous than it is. Sergeant Wilson, promoted to replace the Marines who died in previous battles, was equally matter-of-fact. "Commander, war isn't about being moral. It's about winning. The side that wins gets to decide what was moral afterward. And what will humanity decide about the Cascade virus? That it was necessary. That good people died to make it possible. And that we'll carry the weight of what we did so that future generations don't have to." But it was his final conversation with Admiral Collins that gave Veltar the most insight into humanity's transformation. They stood in the ship's observation lounge, watching the stars stream past as they traveled home from the galaxy's greatest battlefield. "Admiral, I need to ask you something directly. Do you regret what humanity has done?" Collins was quiet for a long moment. "Commander, regret implies that I would choose differently if given the chance. I wouldn't. Every human who died in this war, every moral compromise we made, every line we crossed, It was all necessary to stop something that would have consumed every living thing in the galaxy. But the cost was everything we were before this war began, Collins finished. We were an idealistic young species that believed in peaceful solutions and diplomatic compromise. Now we're something else entirely. What are you now? Collins smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We're the species that other species call when they need monsters destroyed. We're the civilization that's willing to damn itself to save everyone else. We're the guardians who keep the peace by being more dangerous than anything that threatens it. 3 days later, they arrived at Council Space to find the galaxy celebrating. News of the swarm's destruction had spread through every system, and species that had been preparing for evacuation were instead planning victory parades. The Council had declared a universal holiday, and messages of gratitude poured in from every corner of civilized space. But Veltar noticed something in those celebrations that chilled him. Along with the gratitude, there was fear. The same species that praised humanity's victory also spoke in whispers about what humans have been willing to do to achieve it. The Cascade virus had saved the galaxy, but it had also shown everyone that humanity possessed the capacity for absolute destruction. In his final report to the Zephyrian High Command, Veltar struggled to find words for what he'd witnessed. How do you describe a species that can commit genocide while maintaining their essential humanity? How do you explain the terror of realizing that your allies are more dangerous than your enemies? He wrote, I have stood beside humans in their darkest hour and watched them make choices that will haunt them forever. They saved the galaxy by becoming the one thing that the galaxy should fear most, a species with the power to destroy anything and the wisdom to choose when that destruction is necessary. The void swarm is gone, consumed by their own appetites turned back upon them. The galaxy is safe, protected by guardians who paid the ultimate price for that protection. But I have learned something that will trouble my sleep for the rest of my life. True fear is not the terror of facing an unstoppable enemy. True fear is the knowledge that somewhere in the darkness, there exists a species capable of stopping any enemy by any means necessary, and they have chosen to call you friend instead of target. Humanity has become the galaxy's apex predator, the ultimate weapon against extinction-level threats. And the most terrifying part is that they're probably the best choice we have for that role. The report concluded with a single recommendation that would shape galactic policy for generations to come. Under no circumstances should any species ever give humanity a reason to consider them an enemy. The price of their friendship is our moral comfort. The price of their enmity would be our existence. Years later, Veltar would watch human children playing in parks on Earth, laughing and running with the innocent joy of youth. He would marvel at how these smiling, curious beings would grow up to be the galaxy's protectors and its most dangerous predators. They would learn to love fiercely and destroy completely, to show mercy to the innocent and none to the guilty. And every night, as he looked up at the stars, Veltar would remember Commander Hayes and Dr. Park, two humans who had chosen damnation to save a galaxy full of strangers. He would remember that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their tactics, but their willingness to sacrifice everything, including their souls, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Standing beside humans, he had indeed discovered the meaning of true fear, but he had also discovered something else, the meaning of true courage, true sacrifice, and true love for all living things. Humanity had become monsters to fight monsters, but they had done it out of compassion, not cruelty, and that made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy and the most valuable ally civilization had ever known.